Welcome to QInsight from QGate, where we talk to the people who are at the sharp end of CRM, AI, and business transformation. I'm Steve Clarke.
And I'm Alastair Jupp. For the last episode of the season, we're joined by David Panni. David has spent over 25 years in the off-highway and engineering sector, holding senior roles across structures, simulation, and engineering leadership. With a PhD in the design and optimization of lightweight components, he brings deep technical expertise alongside real-world experience of deploying emerging technologies inside complex organizations. Alongside his engineering background, David is also a non-executive director at the Welding Institute and has spent recent years working closely with AI, exploring how it can be applied practically, both in large organizations and SMEs.
David, it's excellent to have you on the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
No, thank you, guys. Looking forward to it.
Great stuff. So, David, we had a call as a precursor to the recording of the episode today, and invariably the conversation kicked off and centered around AI. And you raised an interesting point that Microsoft had done a very good job in naming their AI assistant in Copilot. Why is that?
Why is that? Well, I think the reason I think it's spot on is because so many large language models that you see have just got nice names, if you like. You know, they're humanizing it. But actually what the Copilot is doing is supporting me. And I use the Copilot analogy because I'm the one ultimately, when I've got a task, I'm the one that's responsible for making sure the plane gets off the ground. In other words, I need to make sure that the task has the right direction. When you're at cruising altitude, I can relax. I can do some checks. I can do some other things. I can let the Copilot do all the hard work. So for 2,000 miles for that flight, or however long that flight is, then when it comes to the end, once the flight's been most of the work's been done, I then have to step in as the pilot and make sure that that plane lands safely and that everybody is safe at the end of the day. So that was the analogy, and I think the branding is absolutely spot on in that sense.
Excellent.
Sorry, Ali, carry on. Yeah, just to add to that, there's the old adage, right? People, process, and technology, right? Now, technology itself is an accelerator. It doesn't actually, it doesn't own anything. It's not accountable for anything. We're still accountable for it. So that Copilot it helps you do the work. It doesn't do the work for you. That's a really critical part for me.
You're absolutely spot on. And then, the tools are so powerful in a generative sense. You can generate an awful lot of really good quality stuff. But ultimately, when I forward that on to somebody, I'm the one that's responsible. It's my name on that email. It's my name at the bottom of the report. I can't delegate the responsibility and say, well, actually Copilot generated it. So I'm the one that has to check it, make sure that it's not hallucinating, make sure it's actually given what I want. And quite often you have to prompt it and say, well, actually, that wasn't quite what I wanted. Can you reformat it? And the nature of generating content is becoming different now.
I think also that there's a tendency for most people who use it in their day-to-day working roles will trust what it spits out. And in actual fact, and you think, you'd hope that most people are going through and checking the output, but I guarantee a lot of people will just copy and paste whatever comes out. And then, as you say, you're signing your name to it. That's it.
Yeah, and I've started to find myself, as I've used it more and more over the last 2 years or so, you do get more confidence, but you know when to trust it. And on a number of occasions, I've been maybe involved in meetings that I've generated some content super quickly for somebody, and I will send it in its raw state, but I will say this has been unchecked and unverified by me at the beginning of that email to make people aware that you can't, I'm a professionally registered engineer, and, that comes with a responsibility. And I see that's it's a new skill that everyone's having to adapt to, isn't it? We never had this before. But if you were a senior member of staff who had a PA, for example, and that you delegated a task to the PA, would you check it? Of course you would. You would read it over. You would make sure that it was your voice.
I've heard recently that, in fact, I've actually used this, and I'm not advocating for not checking it yourself, but actually putting it in one GPT and then getting another one to double check it, the previous one's work. You can actually refine it, and it will help you do that process. It still doesn't advocate, that you should not check this work, but it does give you a first pass on it. And I've actually done that several times before, actually.
Yeah, it's another tool that you can use to just make your checking job even easier.
Yeah,
but you still need to look at it and read it.
So I was going to say, Ali, out goes the concept of co-pilot. That's fully autopilot, that, isn't it? If you've got two GPT models doing your work and checking it as well. So
it's an architecture model, though, Steve. Right? I've heard of people having agents checking agents' work. So the thing is with AI and agents is they're very good at you can get much more accurate results when they're doing very specific things. Right, so if you've got one creating, you can have one that your job is to find fault with that, and these are the things you need to be looking out for. Then you get that extra layer of validation, and it's actually being built into architecture, right?
Yeah, and I've been involved in today, developing an agentic system where what's happened is an agent has been used to double check the work of the previous agent. And I think we're learning how to use these tools. I think we shouldn't forget that the concept of ChatGPT, it's only really been in the public consciousness for probably a couple of years now, till maybe 3 years. It's changing the way we work, and we are all on a learning journey. And there's a lot of people claiming to be experts in it, but we are all I'm not saying making it up as we go along, but we are all learning as we go.
Absolutely, and that leads on quite nicely. You use the phrase it's changing how we work, and it's absolutely changing the way that everyone performs their various functions on a day-to-day basis. And in that conversation that we had prior to the call, you raised the point that you think everyone now has become the CEO. This has given everyday workers the ability to effectively be their own CEO. What do you mean by that?
It is. Well, when you look at what a CEO does, they set a task, or they set tasks, they ask difficult questions, and they know how to sniff out the nonsense when they don't get responses to those questions that make sense. That boils down a CEO's role. And that's what happens with the large language models. The tools like Copilot, you have to set direction. You have to set it a target. Then you ask it questions. And then, kind of tying up with what we were saying earlier on, you have to check out and sniff out does it pass the sniff test? Does it make sense? So in a way, I think that is the skills of a CEO. So when you consider a community of staff all working, they're starting to need different skills. When I first started my career, the very best, most valuable employees were those that could answer the questions the best. Now it's been turned on its head. The very best employees are those that can ask the very best questions. And, I've used a number of times. I think the future is going to belong to those people that ask the very best questions. And it's allowing creativity in a way that creativity wasn't present before. You couldn't be creative because you were too busy writing things down. So does Does that kind of make sense? That train of
It
thought.
it does.
I watched a Diary of the CEO. I'm pretty sure it was a Diary of the CEO episode, and I had a guest on there. And forgive me, I can't remember the name of the guest. But the guest said that knowledge is going to be worth zero going forwards. That was his perspective. I'm not saying this is right, but this was this guy's perspective on it. And he said that AI is commoditized access to information, and what used to differentiate people was knowing things, and is now widely accessible at near zero cost, that previous knowledge. So the value moves up the chain, and judgment, context, decision making, execute, all the things the CEO right does in practical terms is not what you know, it's how you use what's available to drive outcomes. And as you said, a CEO does that. Instead of it being an agent or an AI, it would have been his people, applying the right people, employing the right people. It's a really good analogy, actually.
So I had a conversation with a partner only yesterday, actually, and it was along the lines of recruitment, and they were giving some advice to a company that we're working with, and describing the type of role that they had an opening for. And one of the lines that were drafted into the job description were must be conversant in AI. So must have the ability to utilize tools like Copilot and ChatGPT. So we've kind of gone through that shift of back in. I won't start talking about when I started in the workforce, kind of leaving education, but there were where the lines in the job description must be able to use Excel, must be able to use Outlook, must be able to use Word. We've kind of gone really hyper with that and into where we are now, into the point where actually you're absolutely right. I think you would struggle to go into any job now, irrespective of what that job might be, to find a role that can't be improved or had value added to it by using AI. So to the point of Ali, to your point about Diary of a CEO, it's not necessarily the knowledge, it's the ability, it's the prompting, it's the ability to ask the right questions and elicit the right responses. So I completely agree. That's where we are now.
It's not necessarily the knowledge that's in your head anymore. It's how you solve a problem. So, I've reached a point in my career where I'm comfortable that you could throw a problem at me and I can solve it, or know how to solve it. But the real value isn't the answer. It's what's the thought process that's going on in my mind.
Are you working?
Show you working, exactly. That's what differentiates me now from other people in the industry. That's the key point I think I would make. But going back to recruitment, there's always the classic question. If you go for an interview, they would then, at the end of the interview, they would then say, well, have you got any questions for us? My number one question would simply be, what AI tools have you got that I can use? And if they couldn't answer that, I would walk away. And the reason for that is that I can say that in the last couple of years, my personal productivity has improved by at least 40%. 40%.
Yes, and prior to AI assistant, what do you think the training investment would be for you to get a 40% uptick in your output? And you multiply that across the workforce.
It would just not, yeah. I mean, it's phenomenal. I've been working for 25 years. I can probably genuinely say that of that period, probably about 10 of those years have been spent looking for data, looking for information. And when you put it on that scale, you think, my goodness, how much does that cost?
It's interesting, actually. You think the amount of time that you would have spent enabling yourself to obtain that data, to process it, to kind of arrive at whatever the outcomes might be. We had a guest in season 1, Luke Williams, came on, and he was talking about graduates that are coming through into the workforce now are going to be the truly first AI conversant employees, and they're going to hit it with aplomb. You know, they don't have to spend 10 years doing what we have done, you know, to get to the point, a knowledge point. They are straight in. I mean, the value there has got to be incredible.
So they are also going to demand that companies change. They're going to come into the workforce and go, "You're doing it how?" You know, and there's going to be some interesting conversations in the boardrooms, because it's going to get up. You've got people pushing boundaries and doing things in different ways, and making organisations change. And I think that's what Luke was alluding to. You know, bring these types of people in, and they will help you go on that journey.
I think that's absolutely true. In reflection, though, I think we're quite lucky as a generation because we've learned the hard way. Now the tools can help us. So we've got the wisdom to be able to sniff out that, you know, when it's giving me something that's wrong. And I think I do worry a little bit that the younger generation, my daughter's generation, for example, coming in, they'll ask the question, but they won't have that wisdom, that experience to say, do you know what, that's not right. That's a potential risk that I can see. But one area that started to fascinate me going over is how do we capture that tacit knowledge? You know, that information that's in our heads. We can't write it down in an SOP or a standard, but it's just that how do you solve a problem? That's really interested me over recently. And I think we can use AI tools to help us capture that or crystallize that knowledge.
I was talking to a client earlier today about this very subject, actually. He was saying he's got some very experienced kind of field service people in his business. And he was trying to figure out, well, you know, how do I get those people in the right place at the right time to answer the questions for the newer ones coming through? I'm saying, well, this is exactly where AI can help you, right? Because as long as you're capturing all that great experience in the right way, whether it's through their conversations with clients or their resolutions of how things have been done, it starts to build up that knowledge base, which can then be interpreted by your AI sitting on top of it, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. I think there's a lot of work at the moment in terms of introducing AI systems across many, whichever hyperscaler you use or whatever tool for distributing the knowledge. I'm not so sure there's been so much work in terms of actually crystallizing that knowledge from people's heads. And that's a bit harder to do. If you've got support tickets, it's relatively straightforward thing to do. But certainly in my career, if you like, if you wanted to capture and crystallize the knowledge that was in my head, there isn't a series of support tickets that allows you to get that data. And I think a one-to-one sort of conversation with people can really help draw that information out. And of course, you can transcribe that conversation. You can then capture it that way, if that makes sense.
Is this what Elon Musk's ultimate goal is with his technology of putting chips in people's brains, right?
Yes, I was going to say Neuralink, or I think is the name. Then you'll pick up all the little hints and tips and quirks and nuance of individual experience, I think.
It is. But hey, how exciting is it to be around today? How exciting is it? Because every day I'm picking up from a news feed a new technology, something I've thought, wow, that's phenomenal. That's a game changer. And that's happening on a daily basis. It is scary. I think I can understand why a lot of people can be threatened by it, but it's happening. And the way to do it is to just embrace it and see how you can use it.
I put a post on LinkedIn not so long ago about that I think right now is a great time to be an ideas person. Right? In the past, you could have all these fantastic ideas, but actually making those ideas happen, you come up against all these barriers. I don't have the experience. I don't have the knowledge. I don't, I haven't got the resource. I haven't got the budget to do these things. And then all of a sudden, you do, right? You have all of those things you can use to help. So, it's an amazing time to be someone who's very creative, I think.
I think you're absolutely right. And you're seeing this with the number of startups now, aren't you? And, startups that are beginning with these tools embedded in them, allowing the founders to focus on the creativity. They're not having to worry about all the admin, which they can just get an agent doing that for me. And I think a lot of legacy organizations, the big organizations, are probably looking at the smaller ones with a bit of jealousy, thinking, how on earth are you doing that? And of course, they don't have all the legacy systems that need to be. They can be genuinely agile. Yeah. You're absolutely spot on there.
Absolutely. So going back to an interesting point you mentioned a moment ago about, hypothetically, you go to an interview and they ask you if you have any questions, but you would ask the question, what tools do you use? We're still at a point where AI, there's a bit of hesitance, but I think we're now at a point where virtually every business is realizing they don't have a choice. They have to kind of go down the AI route, or they're gonna go out of business, or they're gonna fall significantly behind their competitors. But and the conversations that we have, often cost is an issue, because yes, you of course have the free versions of ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, whatever that might look like. You don't have the enterprise security from a proper licensed version, the ring fencing, the security and safety, safe in the knowledge that your data isn't going to go anywhere. And there's a cost to that. And we're now at a point now where agents are working on a consumption basis. And the more complex the agent, the more amount of credits that these things are using, and that the cost can kind of build up. And a lot of the conversations that we're having come back to cost savings. But when we spoke earlier, David, you said that actually you framed it differently. It's not necessarily about the ROI, it's the capacity. It's the capacity that AI will then afford. What do you mean by that?
It's always a tricky one, that our whole ROI question, if you like, because absolutely it has to wipe its face. You can't do it, especially if you're a small organization. You can be very sensitive to your costs. It has to wipe its face. But sometimes it's almost impossible to quantify the value of it. If you didn't have it, you wouldn't have done something. And I struggle with it in some cases. It is absolutely critical that you come up with a credible ROI, but in some cases it's just not possible. And if you look at the big technological changes that have taken place, people quite often, they'll underestimate the value of the tool. I'll give you an example. Within manufacturing engineering, when people gave up their drawing boards and they moved to CAD, what is the ROI of moving to CAD? In hindsight, any organization that didn't do it doesn't exist. You have to make a credible ROI. You can start small, though. I think there are things that you can start small with these tools. Even with a paid license.
So we talked in season 1 about the capacity gap. I think it's a term coined by Microsoft that every business needs to grow in order to keep up with the demand of what's happening in the world. But there's a massive gap between the resource they've got and the growth expectations that they need to deliver. And that's the capacity is the growth lever, right? Cost saving is really defensive mindset to it, whereas capacity is an offensive one. It's actually going after. So it's really sad that businesses are looking at replacing people with AI, and they are looking at that, right? I think the far better way is to look at it. Well, I've got this set of people here now, but actually I can expand my capacity massively and grow into that. It's more about the growth rather than the cost. And I think that's a much better way to look at what AI can
And
do for a business, a
and
much more positive way.
it's not easy to recruit people either. So even when you do get approval to recruit somebody, how easy is it just to quickly get someone on board? And if I can improve my capacity by 40%, or even 20, or even 10%, that's going to more than pay for the license of a co-pilot license, if you like, and the cost of running agents. It's all relative, I think.
So that's interesting, because if we think, and you've used the figure 40%, you think you're 40% more efficient. And if that's not just you, because let's say organizationally, the new standard is using Copilot to perform parts of your role, therefore everyone else, could potentially be 40% more efficient themselves. Is that not setting a new baseline? Because that 140% efficiency is actually the new 100%. Are we kind of making a rod for our own backs a little bit here?
We are, but we don't have a choice. We have to do it. If the organizations aren't making money, then they go out of business. Those that do will survive, and they'll create the new baseline. That's the brutal truth about it. This is happening. The genie's out of the bottle now. And those organizations that adopt it will survive, and those that don't will wither. Every huge technological revolution will have its winners and its losers, and certain organizations won't survive.
We talk about the productivity side of things, right? The best way I can articulate the change in productivity is to look at it from a QGate perspective. In our business, we're a small business, right? We're an SME. But the things we thought, just going back to what I said previously, the things we thought were beyond us, our budget, our skills, our experience are now not. And I think the gap between SMEs and larger businesses is shrinking in terms of what the customer experience they can deliver, that kind of good stuff. We at QGate are taking on things far greater than an SME our size. Take this for example. We're doing a QInsight podcast program, and to be honest, I don't think we would have the capacity to do it, if we didn't have AI supporting us to do it. We do a QBit video channel series. Again, that is supporting people to do those. They're able to do those things because they're freeing up time to utilizing these tools to help them more productive. We're extending our product range, our own internal product ranges. We've got ebook publications. We've got service innovations and product innovations. This is all being enabled by AI. It's as simple as that. It's helping all of us do these additional things and do these great things for our clients that without AI, we just simply wouldn't have had the time to do. So I think it's a really fascinating thing to look at, the productivity side of things.
All organizations are threatened by technological changes, and you can either, as a business, if you implement the new technology badly, then it can massively affect your business. Organizations can wither if they do it badly. If they don't do it, they can wither. So I think the choice is to do it or not to do it. But if I was heading up an organization, I would rather struggle having adopted it. I'd rather fail having tried than not having tried at all, because you've got a chance there of surviving and really, really thriving.
Very, very valid point, David. I wanted to touch on something that again we spoke about before the show today. In that you had an opinion that perhaps the phrase or the term artificial intelligence, and specifically the word intelligence, was a bit of a misnomer. In the fact it's not actually intelligent; it's probability. What do you mean
Yes.
by that?
Well, it is. There's no intelligence, and I think unfortunately the general public have got a view that there is intelligence. It is just a probabilistic. On the balance of probabilities, the next word in this sentence should be X. And you can try this yourself. So when you go into ChatGPT or Copilot and you ask it one question in the morning, and then 2 hours later you ask it exactly the same question, you get a different answer. Fundamentally, the response is the same, but the words are different, and it's based on balance of probability. I think the general public think it's a lot smarter than it actually is.
And that's where that trust comes in, right? People are over trusting it because they believe it's intelligent, and it's not. It's the probability. You touched on something I
Yes.
find really frustrating there. Actually, when you get the perfect response and you try and replicate it, and you don't get the same response. I'm like, no. So what we're doing is trying to balance standard automation with the AI automation, right? Because your standard automation, you get that repetitive same response, whether that's asking a series of set questions that you need to answer and then eluding an AI response at the end of it. That's kind of the way we're looking at it.
Yeah, I think you're
I find it
absolutely
really
right.
frustrating.
It can be frustrating, and it's knowing what the right problem is to use the large language model on. And then other times when you need absolutely the right amount of the right answer. So I found with Excel, when it first came out, Copilot with an Excel, I thought, wow, you can do this. That's fantastic. I can get all this data out of these data sets. And then what I started to realize that it was not what a large language model is designed for. What you end up doing, though, if you wanted to get success, is effectively get the large language model to write some Python code or a SQL query, which is deterministic, and that every time you run it, that will give you the right answer. So using the large language model to generate that code or that call to interrogate the database is really, really powerful. But yeah, it's easy to get carried away. The first time I saw that, I thought, fantastic. And then I started to see the holes in it. It's like, it's not working. Why is it not working?
And the other side of this is obviously the data quality that sits behind this intelligence. That
Yes,
the structure matters more and more than ever. Which is
it does. But in many ways, you can use the tools though to cleanse the data. Looking at finding ways to use the AI to maybe look at large, huge data sets and look for anomalies and point that out so that you can fix them. I think it's going to take us as a generation. I think it's probably going to take us a few years for everybody to get their data sets up and running and secure. When robust is the right word.
I mean, like you have people with experience and the data's in their mind. You've also got people where their data sat on their desktop in a spreadsheet, and then data's in SharePoint. You got data all over the place, and having that is not necessarily easily accessible, right? I'm sure it will be in time, but
yeah, well, I think if you look at some of the legacy organizations, within manufacturing, for example, if you're manufacturing widgets, you collected data as a byproduct of making widgets. The thing at the end of the day that makes you money is the widgets. You've had to collect data as almost like as necessary evil in order to make the widget. And I think what's happened over the last couple of years is people are starting to realize that data in itself has value. So it's going to take a while for organizations to get that data cleansed and get it structured. So when you're designing a widget now, you first of all design your data structure. And in some respects, that's where I think sort of newer manufacturers possibly have an advantage, because they're starting from the beginning, which they know that the data is important now.
Excellent, David. So, throughout the first season of QInsights, and now as we reach the end of the second season, we have tried to give, I think, practical insight, advice, dare I say it, to the listeners that we have of the show. And we've mainly spoken in the frame of SMEs, SMBs, kind of the mid-market space. So with that in mind, what is, let's think, one kind of practical AI habit or AI tip that every business should be doing or should adopt? What's your advice?
I think the first thing is have curiosity. You have to be curious. I think then enabling your people to explore, because there's no single training course that you can go on. Every application is going to be different. So I would encourage people to be curious and allow your people to explore the art of the possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it certainly does to me, right? And again, I was talking to a client this morning about a similar thing where he was talking about the AI. And I said, one of the critical things to get in place is your governance, right? And then you can let your people loose on it, and they will amaze you with what they're doing with it, right? But get those guardrails in place, and Microsoft lends itself very well to that, right? Get your guardrails in place, and then empower them, and enable them to utilize the technology. Don't tell them how to use the technology; they'll learn. It's not like teaching someone how to do a process as you would do historically. It's, here's the tool, get them started on it, and they will take it on the journey. Culture in your business becomes really important. I think that culture of learning, that culture of growing and developing, and I think certainly from QGate's perspective, that's been really beneficial for us. Right?
I think you're right. The other thing is, I think is probably quite important, is from a governance perspective, is avoiding oversharing data. And with things like OneDrive, etc., it's not impossible that you could put an important sensitive HR data that somebody can access. So that's critical, that people make sure they understand how to share data and give permissions, which is something it took me a while to do, if I'm honest, to moving to OneDrive and granting permissions. So rather than creating an Excel file, which was then emailed out to somebody, and they would then email it on to somebody else, they would make some changes and then email it back, and I'd have to make some changes in my original document. Just having OneDrive is incredibly powerful, but it is a different mindset. The fact that you have to just say, right, I'm going to make sure that before I send it out, I'm going to send it with the right permissions and share it with the right permission.
We treated ourselves as customer zero, 18 months ago on this, and I can tell you some horror stories, the things we uncovered, just some default settings we had in place that you're like, oh my word, ensuring you're sharing it in the right way becomes really important, right? Really important.
I think from an SME perspective, that's probably one of the most important things. And then giving people the tools, just give them the support, make sure they're not wasting their time on it. I mean, certainly what I've seen in the past with adoption of tools like Copilot is that if you would give it to a group of 100 people, 50% of them would ask it a question and they'd think, oh, that's a stupid answer. And it's because they've asked a stupid question. The other 50% would get a stupid answer, but then they'd think, I asked a stupid question there. What happens if I rephrase it another way? And they get it, and then they think, oh, they see the power of it. The first group throw it in the bin and they say, I'm never going to use that. This AI is a load of overhyped rubbish, isn't it?
I won't tell you who it was, but there was someone, not in our business, but close to our business, who turned around to me and said, it's like talking to a bloke in the pub that, after he's had a few drinks and they seem to know it. And I'm like, it's really not that, right? And he was very resistant. I think he's coming around now, but it just made me laugh when he said it.
I like that analogy a lot. Brilliant, David. Well, I think that's about all we've got time for in this episode. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been incredibly insightful. Alastair, over to you.
I just wanted to do a brief closing statement that AI is giving every individual more capability than ever before, right? But capability without clarity will create chaos in your business. The businesses that win won't be the ones using the most AIs. They'll be the ones where work is clearly defined, owned by the right people, supported by a culture that embraces change and accountability, because AI won't fix your business systems. It will just make your people and your culture and your workflows run faster. But I just wanted to say a big thank you to David for joining us on the show. And thanks to everyone at home for listening to the last episode of the season. If you enjoyed it, be sure to follow or subscribe, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, or YouTube.
Absolutely right. And we will be back in the summer for another season of QInsight. So in the meantime, to learn more about QGate and how we help businesses grow using Dynamics 365 and Copilot, visit qgate.co.uk. We will see you next time.